My name is Claire Mercer, and I want to tell you about the week I came home to find strangers had slept in my house. Not strangers who had broken in, strangers who had been invited, strangers who had been given fresh towels, a printed Wi-Fi password on a laminated sticker, and a hand-drawn map to the nearest coffee shop. Strangers who had paid $68 a night to sleep 12 feet from my children's bedrooms, in a house where my name was on the mortgage, and my name was on the deed, and my name was absolutely, categorically not on the Airbnb listing. That listing belonged to someone else. Someone who had a spare key I'd given her in case of emergencies. Someone who knew the layout of my home well enough to photograph every room. Someone who had been depositing the rental income into her own Venmo account for 3 weeks before I walked through my own front door and noticed that the guest room smelled like a stranger's shampoo, and the hand towels had been folded into little fan shapes I had never once done in my life. Her name was Diane Mercer. She was my mother-in-law. She was the president of the Hillcrest Community Church Women's Auxiliary, the most beloved grandmother at Lakewood Elementary's Spring Carnival, and, as I would eventually discover, a woman with a pattern of treating other people's property and other people's lives like personal resources she was fully entitled to manage. By the time the police were involved, the total was $2,100 over 3 weeks, sent to her Venmo in increments of $68, $72, and $85 per night, depending on the weekend. She had given herself a 5-star rating system, a listing description that called my home a cozy family retreat in a quiet Raleigh neighborhood, and a cancellation policy of moderate. I am not making this up. I have the screenshots. I have the Venmo records. I have the printed listing with her profile photo and her first name and a description of my kitchen as chef-inspired with stainless steel appliances. I know this because I am a paralegal, and I have spent 14 years of my professional life understanding exactly what kind of documentation you need when something goes wrong. I just never expected to need that skill set for my own mother-in-law. My name is Claire, and I want you to know that before all of this, I genuinely love Diane Mercer. I want you to hold on to that, because everything that follows will make more sense if you understand that she was not always the woman I came to know. Or maybe she was always exactly that woman, and I just didn't see it yet. I'm still not entirely sure which is worse. If you're watching from somewhere that has given you your own version of a Diane, leave a comment and tell me where you're from. This channel exists because these stories are not rare, and every single one of you who hits that like button tells the algorithm that this story matters. Because it does. It matters more than people want to admit when it's happening behind closed doors. I met Daniel Mercer at a work happy hour in downtown Raleigh in the fall of 2013. He was a structural engineer at a firm 2 blocks from the law office where I was working, and he had come to the bar with a colleague I vaguely knew from a shared parking garage. He was the kind of man who listened when you talked, actually listened, not just waited for his turn. And he had this habit of tilting his head slightly to the right when he was concentrating that I found immediately, embarrassingly endearing. We dated for 2 years before he proposed, and in those 2 years, I met Diane exactly 6 times. She lived 40 minutes south of us in a suburb called Clayton, in a 4-bedroom house she had occupied alone since Daniel's father, Robert, had died of a heart attack in 2009. Each of those 6 times, she was warm, attentive, and almost aggressively welcoming. She called me sweetheart on the 2nd visit. She sent me a card on my birthday that she had clearly gone to some effort to choose, a watercolor illustration of a woman reading in a garden, with a handwritten note inside that said, "I already think of you as mine." I kept that card in a box under the bed for 3 years. I am not sure what I would say to the woman who kept that card now. The first dinner was in October of 2014, a Sunday pot roast at Diane's house that she had clearly been preparing since the previous day. The house smelled like rosemary and caramelized onion when we walked in, and every surface had been cleaned to a specific kind of spotless that communicated effort without announcing it. She hugged me at the door with both arms, the kind of hug that feels like it means something, and she held my hands afterward and looked at me in this way that I can only describe as searching, like she was deciding something. "You're even prettier in person," she said, which was a strange thing to say since she had seen me twice before, but I understood it as nerves and liked her for having them. The pot roast was extraordinary. The table had a centerpiece she had made herself from dried flowers and eucalyptus. She asked me questions about my family, my job, my childhood, and she remembered every answer. 3 months later, she asked how my mother's knee surgery had gone, and I genuinely marveled at her. I told Daniel on the drive home that I thought I was the luckiest woman alive to be inheriting a mother-in-law like her. He smiled and said, "She really likes you, I can tell." He was right. She did like me. For a while. We got engaged in March of 2016 at a restaurant in downtown Durham, and Diane cried when Daniel called her from the table. Real tears, the kind that come before you can stop them, and she asked to speak to me and said, "Welcome to our family, sweetheart. I mean that with my whole heart." I believed her. We began planning the wedding, and Diane inserted herself into that process with a generosity that felt, at the time, like love. She offered to handle the florist consultations because she knew someone from church who could get us a discount. She offered to coordinate with the caterer because she had worked with them for a charity gala and knew what to ask. She offered to address the invitations by hand because she had beautiful handwriting and it would save us money. Each offer was genuine, each offer was gracious, and each offer came with a small, almost invisible reorientation of the decision away from me and toward her. The flowers she chose were lovely. They were not the ones I had shown her photos of. The caterer she coordinated with was excellent. They arrived with a menu slightly different from what Daniel and I had selected, because Diane had mentioned that we'd probably prefer the salmon over the chicken, and the caterer had simply made the adjustment. The invitations were gorgeous. They included a line about the reception being hosted in part by the Mercer family, which Daniel and I had not discussed, and which I noticed only when I saw the printed copies. "I thought it would be nice," Diane said when I mentioned it, setting down her coffee with the careful deliberateness of someone who is choosing not to be offended. "It's just a small thing, Claire. I didn't mean anything by it. And because it was a small thing, and because I was 29 years old and marrying a wonderful man, and the florist had already been paid, I let it go. I let it go the way you let a lot of small things go when you are trying to be the kind of person who doesn't make problems." We were married in September of 2016 at a venue outside Chapel Hill, and it was beautiful. And Diane cried again at the ceremony, and in every photo from that day, she is standing close to Daniel with her hand on his arm and her face tilted toward him in a way that looks like devotion. She gave a toast at the reception that was warm and funny and made everyone laugh, and at the end of it she turned to me specifically and said, "Claire, you make my son better, and that makes you family." The room applauded. My own mother, who had driven up from Wilmington and who had met Diane exactly twice, leaned over and whispered, "She seems lovely." She did. She genuinely seemed lovely. I want you to hold on to that too. The symbol arrived with the wedding gift. It was a key. An old-fashioned brass key on a silk ribbon, enclosed in a small box, with a note that said, "To the home you'll build together. I hope it's always open to the people who love you." I thought it was the most beautiful gift I had ever received. I cried a little. Daniel put his arm around me. The key was purely decorative. It didn't open anything, but Diane had had it engraved on one side with our wedding date and on the other with the word home. I hung it on a hook in our entryway for 2 years. It is not there anymore, but I'll tell you what I did with it later. Our daughter Lily was born in 2018 and our son Marcus in 2020, and with each child, Diane's involvement in our lives expanded in ways that felt natural at first and suffocating later and criminal eventually. She drove up from Clayton the day we brought Lily home from the hospital and stayed for 5 days. She cooked, she cleaned, she held the baby while I slept, and she was, in those first days, genuinely indispensable. I was grateful. Daniel was grateful. The gratitude was real. What I didn't notice then, what I would only understand much later, was that Diane was also quietly reorganizing. She moved items in my kitchen to locations that made more sense to her. She rearranged the nursery because the original layout put the crib too close to the window. She gave my next-door neighbor, a woman named Patricia, her phone number and told her to call if she ever noticed anything concerning about the house or the baby. I found out about that last one 6 months later, when Patricia mentioned it in passing and seemed surprised that I hadn't known. "She said you'd asked her to," Patricia said, and I stood in my own driveway holding a 3-month-old and tried to reconstruct the conversation in which I had apparently requested my mother-in-law be added to my neighbor's informal surveillance network. That conversation had not happened, but Diane had said it had, and Patricia had believed her, and I was standing there trying to figure out if this was something I needed to be concerned about or something I was being too sensitive about. I chose too sensitive. I was wrong. The spare key came in the summer of 2019, and I gave it to her myself, which is something I have thought about many times since. Lily was 14 months old, Daniel was traveling for work 3 days a week, and I had come home from the pediatrician to discover I had left my house keys at the office. I called a locksmith, I called Daniel, I called my mother, and then I called Diane. She drove up from Clayton in 40 minutes, let me in with the copy she'd apparently already had made from the time she'd borrowed our key to let in a furniture delivery while we were on vacation. I had not known she'd made a copy. I found out that day. I told myself it was practical. She was 40 minutes away. She loved the kids. "You should just keep it," I said, because I was tired and grateful, and Lily was fussing, and I was not thinking about all the ways a spare key is also a permission slip. Diane looked at the key in her palm and smiled the way you smile when someone gives you something you already knew you were going to have. "Are you sure?" she said. "Of course," I said. That was the last decision about that key that I ever made. The incidents that followed were each individually explainable. She would stop by unannounced, sometimes when I was home, sometimes, I later realized, when I was not, and she always had a reason. She'd been in the area. She wanted to drop off something she'd baked. She'd noticed on her last visit that the back porch light was out and she'd brought a replacement bulb. Once I came home from work to find the refrigerator had been rearranged, the leftovers I'd planned for dinner moved to the back, a container of her chicken soup at the front with a sticky note that said, "Made this for the babies." The babies were 4 and in daycare. They were fine. They did not need emergency chicken soup, but the soup was there and the refrigerator had been rearranged, and I had not been home, and she had not called to say she was coming. When I mentioned it to Daniel that evening, he laughed. "Mom's just being mom," he said, which was a sentence I would hear approximately 400 more times over the following 2 years. "She has a key, Claire. I think she just wanted to help." I put the soup in the freezer and didn't say anything else. I washed the dishes. I washed them until the water went cold, and then I opened my laptop and started a document I labeled Household Notes. I am not sure, looking back, whether I already knew what that document would eventually become, or whether I was just a paralegal who had learned that writing things down was the only way to make them real. Probably both. The pattern that developed over the next 2 years had a rhythm to it that I can describe now with precision, because I documented it, but that I could only feel at the time as a low, constant pressure, the kind of thing that doesn't read as pain until you've been living with it long enough to forget what not pain feels like. Diane would do something that crossed a line. I would mention it to Daniel. Daniel would explain it away, sometimes gently, sometimes with a frustration that was directed at me rather than at the situation. Diane would find out I had mentioned it, through Daniel, always, because Daniel told his mother everything in the same unconscious way he breathed, and she would call me with an apology that was structured as a misunderstanding. "I'm sorry if I overstepped, sweetheart. I just love those kids so much, and I worry." That sentence, in various configurations, was her all-purpose response to every boundary I ever named. It was a perfect sentence. It was impossible to argue with. If you argued with it, you were the person who didn't want a grandmother to love her grandchildren, and that was a role I was not willing to play, which she knew, and which she relied on. There was the time she enrolled Lily in a Saturday morning art class at the Hillcrest Community Center without telling me, because she had heard me mention that Lily liked drawing, and she thought it would be good for her. I found out when Lily came home from a Saturday at Grandma's with a painted clay pot and a schedule for the next 6 weeks. "I paid for the whole session," Diane said on the phone, in the tone of someone offering information they expect will end the conversation. "I didn't want you to have to worry about it." "I would have liked to be asked," I said, and there was a pause on the line that was about 2 seconds too long. "Of course," she said. "I'll remember that. I just thought, you're so busy, Claire. I didn't want to bother you." There it was. The double move, the gift, and the implication that I was too busy, too distracted, too something to have been consulted in the first place. I said, "Thank you for the class, Diane," and I hung up and I opened the household notes document and added a line. There was the time she called my employer. I found out about this one 14 months after it happened, from a coworker named Rhonda, who mentioned it in the context of something else entirely. Rhonda said she remembered someone calling the front desk and asking to speak with the office manager about my schedule, explaining that she was my mother-in-law and she was trying to coordinate a family medical appointment. The office manager, a woman named Susan, had told the caller that she couldn't share employee schedule information and had made a note of it. Rhonda mentioned it because she thought it was funny. I did not think it was funny. When I asked Susan about it, she confirmed it and showed me the note. Date, time, the name Diane Mercer, the stated reason. I photographed the note. I added a line to the document. I did not tell Daniel about this one for 3 weeks, because I was still deciding what it meant and whether I had the energy to hear him explain it. But I still didn't know the worst part. What I found when I came home in April wasn't just a boundary crossed. It was a crime committed. And it had been going on for 3 weeks before I walked through my own front door. The trip to Asheville was planned in January of that year, 2023, for the first week of April. My mother had moved to Asheville after my stepfather's retirement, and she had been asking for months for an extended visit. I arranged to take 5 days of PTO, and Daniel arranged to take the kids to his sister's house in Greensboro for the same week. His sister Patty had 2 kids, close in age to Lily and Marcus, and everyone agreed it would be a good time. Diane knew about the trip. I had mentioned it at Christmas dinner, and she had said, "Oh, that's wonderful, honey. Your mother must be so excited." She was. I was. The house would be empty for 6 days, from Monday morning to Saturday evening, and the only person with a key to it, besides Daniel and me, was Diane. I did not think about that fact in January. I would think about almost nothing else in April. I want to be precise about what I found and in what order, because the sequence matters. I arrived home on a Saturday evening at approximately 6:15 p.m. Daniel and the kids wouldn't be back from Greensboro until Sunday afternoon, so I had the night to decompress and unpack. I unlocked the front door, brought my bag inside, and noticed 2 things almost simultaneously. There was a faint smell of unfamiliar soap, something floral and synthetic, the kind of thing that comes from a hotel-sized bottle, and the entryway rug had been moved approximately 2 feet to the left, pushed against the wall as if to accommodate foot traffic. I told myself the rug had probably been moved by Daniel before he left. I told myself the soap smell was probably residual from a cleaning product Diane had used, because she had been known to stop by and clean things without telling me. I set my bag down and walked toward the kitchen, and that's when I saw the Wi-Fi password. It was on a small sticker, the kind you'd print from a label maker, affixed to the inside of the kitchen cabinet door above the coffee maker. The sticker said, Mercer Guest House Wi-Fi, Mercer Home 2023. I stood very still. My hands were in my jacket pockets, and I pressed them flat against my thighs, because that was the only way to keep them from moving. The Wi-Fi password on my router was not Mercer Home 2023. It was a random string of letters and numbers that I had never changed from the default because I had never needed to. Someone had changed it. Someone had created a new password and printed it on a label and stuck it inside my kitchen cabinet. I took out my phone and photographed the sticker. Then I walked down the hall to the guest room. The guest room in our house is a 10 by 12 space at the end of the hallway between Marcus's room and the hall bathroom. It had a queen bed, a small dresser, a closet, and a window that faced the backyard. When I had left on Monday morning, it had contained a comforter in a pattern I'd bought at Target 3 years ago, a set of white sheets, and a lamp with a cream shade. What it contained when I opened the door on Saturday evening was different. The comforter had been replaced with a white duvet, a better one from the feel of it, with an embroidered edge. The pillows had matching shams I had never owned. There was a folded set of white hand towels on the dresser, fanned out in a spa arrangement, with a small card tucked between them that said, "Fresh towels on request. Just text," with a phone number I did not recognize. There was a basket on the dresser containing sample-size shampoo, conditioner, a bar of lavender soap, and a small bottle of lotion. There was a hand-drawn map, on cardstock, in Diane's unmistakable Palmer Method cursive, showing the route from our address to a coffee shop called Morning Bell, with a note that said, "Best lattes in Raleigh, 3 blocks east." There was a USB charging hub on the nightstand that I had not purchased. And on the back of the door, there was a printed card in a plastic sleeve that said, in a clean, sans serif font, "Welcome to the Mercer Guest House. We hope you enjoy your stay. Please leave a review on Airbnb." My vision tunneled to that card in a way that I can only describe as the world getting very small very quickly. I photographed everything. I photographed every surface, every item, every angle. I photographed the towels and the basket and the map and the card on the door. My jaw was clenched so tight I could feel the pressure in my temples. I was breathing through my nose in the careful, measured way you breathe when you are deciding not to react until you understand exactly what you are reacting to. I sat on the edge of the guest bed, the bed where strangers had slept, in my house, with my children's framed school photos visible from the doorway, and I opened Airbnb on my phone. I typed in my address. The listing appeared in under 4 seconds. Mercer Guest House, cozy family retreat in Quiet Raleigh Neighborhood. 5 photos, the guest room, the living room, the kitchen, the backyard, and a shot of the front of our house taken from the sidewalk. The host name was Diane M. The listing had been active for 23 days. It had 11 reviews, all 5 stars. The price was $68 per night on weekdays and $85 on weekends. I scrolled through the reviews with my phone balanced on my knee and my other hand pressed flat against the mattress. Super clean and welcoming. Diane was a wonderful host, very responsive. The neighborhood is lovely and the house felt very safe. Great value, highly recommend. Diane left us a map to the best coffee shop. Such a thoughtful touch. I put the phone face down on the mattress and sat there for a moment without moving. The guest bed was very comfortable. The duvet was, objectively, nicer than the one I'd had before. I noticed both of these things in the distant, factual way you notice irrelevant details when the relevant ones are too large to look at directly. I called Daniel. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I called again. He picked up on the second ring, sounding slightly distracted, the kids audible in the background. "Hey, you home?" he said. "Yes," I said. "I need you to tell me what you know about the Airbnb listing for our guest room." There was a silence that lasted exactly long enough for me to understand that he did not know what I was talking about. The what? He said. Your mother listed our guest room on Airbnb, I said. There are strangers' belongings in our guest room. There is a Wi-Fi password sticker in our kitchen that I have never seen before. There is a map to the Morning Bell coffee shop in your mother's handwriting on our guest room dresser. The listing has been active for 23 days. It has 11 reviews. It is listed under your mother's name. Another silence. Claire, he said, in the tone he used when he was trying to slow something down. Okay, I'll call her. Daniel, I said, I need you to hear what I'm saying. Strangers have been sleeping in this house. Strangers have been given a key to this house. Our children's home. Our address. I hear you, he said. I hear you. Just let me call her and find out what happened. I know what happened, I said. I'm asking you to understand it. He was quiet. I could hear Marcus saying something in the background, the high-pitched insistence of a 4-year-old who needed something, and Daniel said, Hold on, bud. And then to me, I'll call her right now, okay? I'll call her and we'll figure this out. He said will. He said it automatically, instinctively, the way people say it when they mean I'll handle this and make it go away. I said, okay, and I hung up, and I sat in the guest room of my own house for another 2 minutes before I stood up, walked to my office, opened my laptop, and began building a case. Here is something that is useful to know about me. I am a paralegal at a firm that specializes in civil litigation. I have spent 14 years watching attorneys build and destroy arguments on the basis of documentation. I know what admissible evidence looks like. I know what a chain of custody is. I know that in North Carolina, which is a one-party consent state for audio recording, I can record any conversation I am a participant in without informing the other party. I know that identity theft and unauthorized use of property are separate charges with separate statutes. I know that Airbnb's terms of service explicitly prohibit hosts from listing properties they do not own or have explicit legal authority to manage. I know that $2,100 in income deposited to a personal account from unauthorized commercial use of someone else's property is not a gray area. I know all of these things not because I was planning for this, but because this is how I think. And in the moment I sat down at my laptop, I stopped being a daughter-in-law who had been wronged and started being a paralegal who had a case. I will tell you that this shift, this particular click into professional mode, was the thing that saved me. Because if I had called Diane that night and screamed at her, which I wanted to do, she would have cried and apologized and told Daniel that I was unstable, and the narrative would have pivoted to my reaction rather than her actions. I have watched this happen in litigation. I was not going to let it happen to me. The first thing I did was document the Airbnb listing in full. I screenshot the listing page, the photo gallery, the host profile, the pricing structure, the availability calendar, the reviews, and the listing description. I noted the listing ID number and the date it was created, March 13th, 2023. I had left for Asheville on April 3rd. The listing had been created 3 weeks before my trip, which meant she had not created it opportunistically when the house was empty. She had created it in advance, knowing the house would be empty, because I had told her at Christmas that I was going in April. The listing had been active for 23 days total, with a gap of about a week in the middle where there appeared to be no bookings. I calculated the revenue from the listed price and the booking history visible on the reviews, approximately $2,100, assuming full occupancy on the booked nights. I would later confirm this number precisely. I photographed the listing on my laptop screen with my phone for redundancy. Then I opened a new document and labeled it Mercer Guest House, Evidence Log. I added the date, the time, and the first entry. April 8th, 2023, 6:15 p.m., arrived home, found guest room altered, discovered Airbnb listing under Diane Mercer's name using our property address. I noted my exact address, the listing URL, the host name, and the listing ID. 14 years of paralegal work had taught me one thing above all others. If you didn't write it down at the time, it didn't happen. I wrote it down. The second thing I did was check my Wi-Fi router. The router was in the hallway closet, a Netgear model we'd had for 3 years. I opened the admin panel on my laptop and found that the password had been changed on March 14th, 2023, the day after the listing went live. The admin account itself had been accessed from a device I didn't recognize. Someone had physically accessed the router, logged into the admin panel. The default credentials for this model are printed on the back of the device, which Diane would have been able to see during any of her visits, and changed the Wi-Fi password to Mercer Home 2023. I screenshot the router admin log. I added it to the evidence document. My jaw was still clenched. I made myself a cup of tea, which I did not drink, and I kept working. Daniel called back 45 minutes after I'd hung up with him. I was still at my desk. "Okay," he said, and I could hear in his voice that he had talked to his mother and was now navigating the space between what she had told him and what he understood I was feeling. It was a space he had been navigating for years, and he had gotten practiced at it, and I hated that he had. So she says she thought she was helping. She says she knows we've been stressed about money since the renovation, and she wanted to do something to contribute. The renovation he was referring to was a kitchen project we'd completed the previous summer, which had run $18,000 over budget, and which we had managed by drawing from savings. We had mentioned this to Diane in passing. We had not asked for help. She says she set it all up herself. She handled the guests. She never let anyone into the kids' rooms or your office. She changed the sheets herself between every stay, and she transferred all the money to her own account because she was going to give it to us as a surprise. His voice was careful and even, the voice of a man reading from notes. "She's really sorry, Claire. She says she knows she should have asked." I let the silence sit for a moment. Outside, it was getting dark, and the street light at the end of our block had come on, and I could see it through the office window, making a small orange circle on the pavement. "Daniel," I said, "I need you to hear me say this very clearly. Your mother used a key I gave her for emergencies to let paying strangers into our home. She changed the Wi-Fi password on our router. She created a commercial rental listing using photographs of our property without our consent. She collected rental income from that listing and deposited it to her own personal account. That is not a misunderstanding. That is not a well-intentioned mistake. That is multiple crimes." He was quiet. "I know you're angry," he said. "I'm not angry," I said. "I'm documenting." More silence. "What does that mean?" he said. "It means I'm taking this seriously," I said. "I need you to decide if you are too." He said he was. He said it in the way people say things when they want the conversation to end. I said goodnight, and I went back to my laptop, and I worked until midnight. What I found next made everything before it look like a warm-up. The third thing I did was check the Venmo records. I didn't have access to Diane's account, but I had the Airbnb listing, and Airbnb processes payouts to hosts through connected payment accounts. The listing was connected to a Venmo account under the username Dia Mercer Home. I could see the profile from the Airbnb host page. It was public. And because Venmo transactions between public accounts are visible by default, I could see the payment history. What I found was not $2,100. What I found was $2,100 from the current listing. But there was also a listing history. Diane had created the account in November of 2022. The Mercer Guest House listing was not the first listing connected to this account. There had been a previous listing, deactivated but still visible in the account's public review history, for an address I recognized immediately. It was Diane's own address in Clayton. She had been renting out a room in her own house since November, which was not a crime. But the Clayton listing had been deactivated in March, right around the time the Raleigh listing went live. She had stopped renting her own room and started renting mine. The timing was not a coincidence. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I added another line to the evidence document and opened a new tab to search for a real estate attorney who handled property rights and unauthorized subletting. The morning after I came home, I called my firm's managing attorney, a woman named Patricia Holloway, who had been practicing civil litigation for 26 years and who had, on several occasions, looked at situations I described to her and said, "Claire, you have a case." She said it again. She said it quietly and precisely, the way she said everything, and then she said, "You need to call the Raleigh Police non-emergency line, you need to contact Airbnb's trust and safety team, and you need to call a criminal attorney because this is outside my lane. But you have a case." What she did is unauthorized use of property at minimum, potentially criminal trespass, if the key was given for a specific limited purpose, and the income she collected could be characterized as conversion, which is civil theft. The Wi-Fi password change may implicate computer fraud statutes. Document everything. Don't confront her yet. Don't tell her what you're doing. I told her I had already started the evidence log. She said, "Good girl." She meant it as a compliment, and I took it as one. I want to say something here that I think matters. I have heard women in situations like mine described as paranoid. I have heard the behavior of documentation, of evidence gathering, of building a quiet case against someone who is hurting you described as cold or calculating or vindictive. I want to say clearly, there is nothing cold about protecting your home and your children. There is nothing calculating about writing down what happened. There is nothing vindictive about wanting the person who wronged you to be held accountable by a system designed for exactly that purpose. What is cold is giving strangers a key to a house where children sleep and calling it a gift. What is calculating is creating a commercial listing of someone else's property and routing the income to your own account. What is vindictive is doing all of this and then framing it, when confronted, as an act of love. I want you to sit with that. I have. The criminal attorney I found was a man named James Okafor, who had an office in North Raleigh and who came highly recommended by one of the attorneys at my firm. He met with me on a Wednesday morning, and I brought my laptop and a printed copy of the evidence log and the screenshots. He read through everything methodically, asked precise questions, and then leaned back in his chair and said, "Let me tell you what you're looking at." He walked me through North Carolina General Statute 1472, which covers larceny and theft by conversion, taking someone else's property for your own use, which includes taking rental income from someone else's property. He walked me through NCGS 1454, which covers breaking and entering, and explained that in North Carolina, entering a dwelling without authorization, even with a key that was given for a limited purpose, can constitute unlawful entry if the access is used for an unauthorized purpose. He walked me through the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act as it applies to unauthorized access to a network device, which is what changing the router password constituted. He told me that Airbnb's terms of service violation was a civil matter between me and Airbnb, not a criminal one, but that the income Diane had collected, $2,100, was recoverable in small claims court as conversion. The key question, he said, is what you want. Do you want money? Do you want criminal charges? Do you want her to never be able to do this again? Or some combination? I told him I wanted her to understand that what she had done was real, that it had consequences, and that she could not explain it away. He looked at me for a moment. "Then we're going to do this in the right order," he said. He told me not to confront Diane yet. He told me to keep documenting. He told me to change the locks and change the Wi-Fi password and document both of those changes. He told me that if she showed up at the house, I should not let her in, and I should document the attempt. He told me that we had a 30-day window before the statute of limitations issues became relevant to the trespass claim, and that we needed to move deliberately, but not slowly. I shook his hand and drove home and changed the locks myself, which cost $127 at the hardware store and took 45 minutes. Then I changed the Wi-Fi password. Then I sat at my kitchen table and photographed both the new lock and the router settings page with the new password and the timestamp. Then I added both entries to the evidence log. Daniel came home Sunday with the kids, and the first thing he did after hugging me was look at the front door lock. He recognized that it was new. The hardware was a different finish, brushed nickel instead of the old oil-rubbed bronze. And he looked at me with an expression that was somewhere between understanding and something harder to name. "I changed the locks," I said. "Okay," he said. He put his bag down and went to help the kids with their things, and I watched him, and I thought about how much I loved him, and how much I needed him to be a full partner in what was coming, and how much I was afraid he wasn't going to be able to do it. He had called his mother 3 times between Saturday night and Sunday afternoon. I knew this because he had not hidden it. Daniel was not a man who hid things. And because I had heard 2 of the calls through the wall of the hotel room where he'd stayed Saturday night in Greensboro. I had not recorded them. I had not needed to. What I needed was for him to come home and look at the evidence and choose. I showed him everything that Sunday night after the kids were in bed. I sat across from him at the kitchen table with my laptop open and the evidence log printed out in front of me, and I walked him through it systematically. The listing creation date, the router access, the Venmo account, the revenue history, the deactivated Clayton listing, the timing. I did not editorialize. I did not say, "Your mother is a criminal," or "Your mother doesn't respect us," or any of the things I had been thinking since Saturday evening. I presented the facts in the order I had documented them, the way I would present a case summary to an attorney. When I finished, Daniel sat back in his chair and rubbed the back of his neck and looked at the ceiling for a moment. "She thought she was helping," he said. I had expected this. "Daniel," I said, "look at the dates. She created the listing on March 13th. She changed our router password on March 14th. She had been planning this for 3 weeks before we left. This was not an impulse. This was not a mistake. This was a plan." He looked at the laptop screen. He looked at the listing. He looked at his mother's profile photo, small and cheerful in the corner of the Airbnb page. "I know," he said, very quietly. "I know it was." I waited. He looked at his hands. I don't know what you want me to do, Claire. She's my mother. I want you to understand that what she did is a crime," I said. "Not a misunderstanding, not a mistake, a crime. And I need you to decide whether you're going to stand next to me while I address it or whether you're going to stand next to her, because I'm addressing it either way." He looked up at me. His eyes were tired and unhappy in the way of someone who has been asked to carry something they didn't choose. "I'm not standing next to her on this," he said. "I need you to know that. I'm with you." He said it, and I believed him, partially. The way you believe someone when you can hear that they mean it and also hear everything they haven't said. I closed my laptop. I said, "Okay." I went to bed. He stayed at the kitchen table for another hour. The next morning, Diane called me. She had not called me since Saturday, and I had not called her, and the call came at 8:14 a.m. while I was getting the kids ready for school. I let it ring. She called again at 8:31. I let it ring. She called a third time at 9:02 when I was in my car in the school parking lot after drop-off, and this time I answered. My phone was in the cup holder, and I reached into my bag and turned on the voice memo app on my second phone, a cheap prepaid phone I had bought at Target on Monday morning specifically for this purpose. Before I picked up, "Claire," she said, and her voice was warm and a little worried, the voice of a woman who has been waiting to explain. "I've been trying to reach you. I just want to talk." "I'm here," I said. "Okay," she said. "Okay, good. First of all, I want to say I'm sorry. I know I should have asked. I know that now, and I'm sorry I didn't." She paused. I didn't fill the pause. You know how worried Daniel and I have been about the renovation costs. and I wanted to do something to help. And I thought if I could handle it all myself, handle the guests and the setup and everything, and then just give you the money at the end, it would be a nice surprise. I wasn't trying to go behind your back. I was trying to help. How much money did you collect, Diane? I said. A short pause. I have it all written down, she said. I can give you every penny. That was always the plan. How much? I said again. Another pause. Around $2,100, she said, give or take. $2,100, I said, from 11 bookings over 23 days. Silence. You looked at the listing, she said. Yes, I said. Claire, I want you to understand that I kept that house spotless. I changed the sheets myself. I was there every morning and every evening. I vetted every guest. No one went into the kids' rooms. No one went into your office. I was very careful. I noticed that she had shifted from apology to defense without transition, the way water finds the lowest point in a room. You gave strangers a key to my house, I said. I gave them access when I was there, she said, and her voice had a new quality now. Something careful and precise underneath the warmth. I was always present, Claire. I wasn't just handing out keys. You used the key I gave you for emergencies to operate a commercial rental business out of my home, I said. That's not what that key was for. I understand that, she said, and I'm sorry. But Claire, I want you to think about this rationally. I made you money. I took care of everything. I didn't ask you for anything. I was trying to do something nice. I said, I need to go, and I ended the call. I sat in the school parking lot for a moment with both phones in my lap. Then I saved the recording, uploaded it to my cloud backup, and added it to the evidence log. But I didn't know yet that what she'd done to me was only part of the story. I found out about the previous daughter-in-law on a Thursday. Her name was Karen, and she had been married to Daniel's older brother Todd for 4 years before their divorce in 2018. I had met Karen exactly twice, once at a Mercer family Christmas and once at a birthday party for one of Todd's kids. And I had liked her both times, in the way you like someone you sense you would know better under different circumstances. She was a dental hygienist who lived in Durham, and I had her number in my phone from a Christmas card exchange we'd done one year and never repeated. I texted her on a Thursday afternoon with a message that said, Hi Karen, this is Claire, Daniel's wife. I'm dealing with something involving Diane, and I wonder if you'd be willing to talk. No pressure at all. She responded in 6 minutes. Oh my God, yes. Call me whenever. She answered before the first ring finished. What did she do? She said, and the question was so immediate and so unsurprised that I felt something in my chest loosen in a way I hadn't expected. I told her. She was quiet for most of it, and when I finished, she let out a long, slow breath. Okay, she said. Okay, I need to tell you some things. What Karen told me took 45 minutes, and a glass of wine I could hear her pouring around the 20-minute mark. She told me that during her marriage to Todd, Diane had done something so similar in structure that the parallel made my hands go cold. Todd and Karen had owned a house in Cary, a smaller house than ours, a starter home, and Diane had a key to it for the same reason I'd given her mine, a general emergency/convenience key given in a moment of trust. In 2016, Todd had been deployed for 6 weeks with the National Guard, and Karen had been working full-time and managing the house alone. Diane had offered to check on the house while Karen was at work. What she had been doing, Karen later discovered, was going through Karen's personal mail, photographing documents, and, this was the part that made me go still, sharing information from Karen's financial mail with Todd, including a credit card statement that showed a balance Karen had not told Todd about. Diane had framed this to Todd as, I found this and I was worried. The fallout had contributed to a period of significant marital strain. Karen had never been able to prove that Diane had been reading her mail because the evidence was circumstantial, and by the time Karen understood what had happened, the mail had been disposed of. But there was more. In 2017, Diane had called Karen's employer, a dental practice in Cary, and spoken to the office manager, identifying herself as Karen's mother-in-law and expressing concern about Karen's mental health following a family crisis. The office manager had noted the call. Karen had found out about it during her performance review when the practice manager mentioned that someone from her family had called to check on her. Karen had nearly lost her job over the implication that she was unstable. She had documented it, but had never filed a complaint because by then her marriage was disintegrating and she was exhausted and she just wanted out. "I should have filed something," she said. "I knew I should have, but I was so tired, Claire. I just wanted it to be over." I asked her if she would be willing to provide a written statement about what had happened. She was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will. I've been waiting for someone to ask." I said, "Thank you," and I meant it with everything I had. I added Karen's information to the evidence log and set up a time for us to meet in person the following week. The week between Karen's call and our meeting was the week Diane made her move. I had been expecting it. James Okafor had warned me that when people sense they are in trouble, they often escalate before retreating, and that escalation is frequently the most dangerous period. On Monday evening, Daniel came home from work quieter than usual. I noticed it in the way he set down his keys, a little too carefully, and in the way he didn't immediately go to check on the kids, which was his habit. He poured himself a glass of water and stood at the kitchen counter, and I waited. "I talked to Mom today," he said. "She's really upset, Claire. She says you won't return her calls." "I'm not avoiding her," I said. "I'm documenting my interactions with her." "She says she feels like you're treating her like a criminal." I looked at him. "She committed multiple crimes," I said. "That's not my characterization. That's the attorney's." He rubbed the back of his neck. "She said something today," he said, and his voice had the quality of someone choosing words very carefully. "She said she's been worried about you, about your mental state. She said she thinks the stress of the renovation and the trip and everything has been... She said she thinks you might benefit from talking to someone." I set down the dish towel I was holding. I set it down very gently on the counter. "She told you I'm mentally unstable," I said. "She didn't say that," he said quickly. "She said she was worried. She said..." "Daniel." My voice was steady. "This is the same thing she did to Karen." He looked at me. "What?" "Karen. Todd's Karen. Call Todd. Ask him if Diane ever expressed concern about Karen's mental health to him while their marriage was in trouble. Ask him." He was very still. "How do you know about Karen?" he said. "Because I called her," I said. "Because Karen is the previous version of this story, and I needed to know how it ended for her." He sat down at the kitchen table. He put his hands flat on the surface and looked at them. He was quiet for a long time. "She called Todd," he said finally, not a question. "She called Todd and she said the same thing about Karen." He said it like someone reading a sentence in a language they'd just learned, slowly, making sure each word was right. "Yes," I said. "Daniel, this is a pattern. This is what she does, and I need you to understand it before she does it to someone else who listens to her." He sat at that table for a long time. I made dinner. The kids came down and we ate together and talked about Lily's science project and Marcus's new best friend at school. And after they went to bed, Daniel said, "I called Todd." I looked at him. "What did he say?" Daniel was quiet. "He said he didn't want to get into it," he said. "But he said if I was asking whether Mom ever said things about Karen that weren't true, the answer was yes." He looked at me. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." "I know," I said. I did know. I also knew that being sorry and being a full partner in what came next were not the same thing, and I was still waiting to find out which one I was going to get. Diane came to the house on a Wednesday morning when she knew Daniel would be at work. I know she knew because I had mentioned his work schedule to her the previous week, before I understood what was coming, and the visit was not a coincidence. I was home. I had taken a personal day to meet with James Okafor, and when I heard the knock at the door, I checked the peephole and saw her standing on the porch with a covered dish in her hands and a sweater in a shade of pale blue that she wore when she wanted to look unthreatening. I turned on the voice memo app. Then I opened the door. She smiled at me, the full, warm Diane Mercer smile, the one that had made me think she was wonderful in 2014, and held out the dish. "I brought banana bread," she said. "I thought we could talk." "I'd rather talk on the porch," I said. "It's a nice morning." A flicker of something crossed her face, just for a second, and then the smile returned. "Of course," she said. She set the dish on the porch railing and folded her hands in front of her in the posture of someone who has prepared. "Claire, I know you're upset," she said, "and I understand why. I should have asked. I know that. But I want you to understand my perspective, because I think if you do, you'll see that my heart was in the right place." "I'm listening," I said. I leaned against the door frame and kept my hands still. "You and Daniel have been under so much financial stress," she said. "The renovation, the kids' school costs, everything. I could see it wearing on you. And I have this resource. I know your house. I know the neighborhood. I know how to manage guests. And I thought, why not use it? Why not do something to help?" She said the word help with such genuine feeling that I almost admired it. "The money was always going to come to you," she continued. "Every penny. I have it set aside right now in an envelope. I was going to give it to you at Easter as a surprise." I said, "Diane, who did you tell about the listing?" She blinked. "What do you mean?" "Did you tell anyone? Friends, neighbors, church friends? Did anyone know you were running a rental business out of my house?" She adjusted her grip on the porch railing. "I mentioned it to a few friends," she said, "just in passing." "Which friends?" "Claire, I don't see why—" "Which friends, Diane?" She named 3 women, Sandra from church, her neighbor Beverly, and a woman named Trish from her book club. I filed each name. "And did any of these women know that the property wasn't yours?" I said. She straightened slightly. "I never claimed it was mine," she said. "I listed it as the Mercer Guest House. It is a Mercer house." "It is my house," I said. "It has my name on the deed. My name, not Mercer. Mine." Something shifted in her expression. The warmth didn't leave. It was too practiced to leave quickly. But something underneath it changed. She tilted her head in a way that was almost imperceptible. "You know," she said, and her voice dropped into a register I had heard only once or twice before, something lower and more precise. "I have done nothing but try to help this family. I have given everything for this family. I drove 40 minutes every time you needed something. I helped with your children when you were too tired to manage. You changed my Wi-Fi password," I said. She stopped. "You entered my home. You changed my network password. You gave strangers access to my address, and you kept the money. I need you to understand that I have documented all of it. I have the router logs. I have the Venmo records. I have the Airbnb listing with your name and my address, and 23 days of booking history. I have a recording of our phone call from Monday morning." She stared at me. For a long moment she was absolutely still, and I saw her face go through something, not remorse, not exactly, but a recalculation, a woman reassessing her position. "You recorded me," she said. "North Carolina is a one-party consent state," I said. "I was a participant in the conversation." She picked up the banana bread from the porch railing. She straightened her sweater. "I think," she said very quietly, "that you are making a very serious mistake." "I think," I said, "that you should talk to an attorney." She walked down the porch steps without another word. I watched her get into her car. I watched her back out of the driveway. I watched the car until it turned the corner and disappeared. Then I went inside, stopped the recording, saved it, and added it to the evidence log. That was the last time she knocked on my door. For a while. The meeting with Karen was on a Friday afternoon at a coffee shop in Durham. She was a compact woman with dark hair and the careful eyes of someone who has learned to read rooms quickly. And when she hugged me hello, it was the hug of someone who understood exactly what the other person was carrying. She had brought a folder. I had brought a folder. We sat across from each other with our folders on the table and our coffees getting cold, and we compared notes for 2 hours. What emerged from that conversation was a picture that was more complete and more troubling than either of us had had individually. Karen had documented 3 incidents from her marriage: the mail surveillance, the employer call, and a third incident she hadn't mentioned on the phone, a conversation Diane had had with Karen's therapist. Karen had been seeing a therapist in 2017 for anxiety, and Diane had called the therapist's office, identified herself as a family member, and expressed concern about Karen's mental state. The therapist had not disclosed any information. HIPAA prevented that. But she had noted the call and mentioned it to Karen at their next session. Karen had the therapist's notes, which she had requested when she left the practice. The notes described the call. Patient's mother-in-law called expressing concern about patient's mental stability and asking whether patient had discussed family matters in session. No information disclosed. Call logged per protocol. I sat across from Karen and read those notes twice. "She tried to get into your therapy," I said. Karen nodded. "She wanted to know what I was saying about her," she said. "She wanted to know if I was building a case. Sound familiar?" It did. It sounded familiar in the specific way that patterns sound familiar once you can see them from outside. I asked Karen if she would sign a written statement. She said yes. I asked if she would be willing to speak to James Okafor. She said yes to that too. I asked her how she was doing now, how she had been since the divorce. She looked out the coffee shop window for a moment. "Better," she said. "A lot better. I just wish I'd done something when I had the chance." I let her off the hook because I was tired, and because I thought no one would believe me. "They'll believe you now," I said, "because now there's 2 of us." She looked at me and smiled, and it was the smile of someone who has been waiting a long time to hear that sentence. James Okafor filed the police report on a Tuesday. It took 11 minutes. The officer who took the report, a woman named Officer Daniels at the Raleigh Police Department's non-emergency desk, asked me if I wanted coffee, which I declined, and whether I had documentation, which I did. I handed her the printed evidence log, the Airbnb screenshots, the router access records, the Venmo account history, and the recording from the porch conversation. She looked through everything with the methodical attention of someone who had seen a lot of things and was assessing where this fell on the spectrum. "This is thorough," she said, which I took as a professional compliment. She filed the report under unauthorized use of property, trespass, and conversion of funds. She told me the detective assigned to the case would contact me within 5 business days. He contacted me in 3. His name was Detective Morris, and he was a lean, careful man who asked precise questions and wrote everything down in a small notebook. He told me that the evidence I had provided was, in his words, unusually well organized. He told me that the case had merit and that he was going to follow up with Airbnb's law enforcement compliance team to request the full booking and payment records. He told me not to contact Diane Mercer in the meantime. I told him I had already changed my locks and had had no voluntary contact with her since the porch conversation. He looked at me for a moment. "You've done this before?" he said. "I'm a paralegal," I said. 14 years. He almost smiled. "That explains it," he said. The night before everything came together, I sat in my kitchen at midnight with the evidence folder in front of me and the house quiet around me. Daniel was upstairs, asleep or pretending to be. We had been moving carefully around each other for 2 weeks, not fighting, not fully connecting, both of us waiting for something to resolve. The kids were asleep. The house was still. I had made tea, and this time I drank it, slowly, sitting at the kitchen table where we had eaten dinner that evening, and where Lily had done her homework, and where Marcus had drawn a picture of a dinosaur that was now held to the refrigerator with a magnet shaped like a pineapple. I looked at the refrigerator. I looked at the evidence folder. I thought about Diane standing on my porch with banana bread and a pale blue sweater, And I thought about Karen sitting across from me at the coffee shop with her folder and her careful eyes. And I thought about the woman who had hugged me at my front door in October of 2014 and said, "Welcome to our family," with my whole heart. I thought about the brass key on the silk ribbon, the one engraved with our wedding date and the word home. I had taken it off the hook in the entryway the week after I came back from Asheville. It was in the evidence folder now, not because it was evidence exactly, but because I needed to decide what to do with it, and I hadn't decided yet. I looked at it for a while. Then I set it aside and reviewed the documents one more time. The Airbnb listing, the router logs, the Venmo records, Karen's statement, the porch recording, the police report number, the name of the detective, the statute numbers that James Okafor had written at the top of his summary memo. I knew all of it by heart, but I read it again anyway, because reading it made it real, and I needed it to be real. I needed to be certain that what I was about to do was necessary, proportionate, and right. It was all three. I closed the folder. I went upstairs. I did not sleep for a long time, but I was not afraid. I was ready. The community event where Diane was exposed was not something I planned, not entirely. What I planned was the legal process, the police report, the detective's investigation, the Airbnb complaint, the civil claim in small claims court. What I did not plan was Diane's decision to host her church women's auxiliary spring luncheon the following Saturday at her own home in Clayton, and to invite Daniel and me, and to invite Karen's former sister-in-law, Patty, Daniel's sister, and to invite approximately 25 women from the Hillcrest Community Church, including Sandra and Beverly and Trish, the three women she had told about the Airbnb listing. I found out about the luncheon on a Thursday, when Patty called Daniel to ask if we were coming, and Daniel mentioned it to me, and I thought about it for a long time. James Okafor had told me not to confront Diane directly. He had not said anything about attending a family event. He had not said anything about what would happen if the detective's investigation reached a conclusion before the luncheon. And as it happened, it did. On Friday morning, the detective called me to inform me that Airbnb had provided the full booking records in response to the law enforcement request, confirming $2,147 in revenue over 11 bookings, all deposited to Diane Mercer's Venmo account, connected to her verified Airbnb host profile. The records confirmed the listing creation date, the router access date, and the booking history. The detective told me that based on the evidence, the district attorney's office had authorized charging Diane Mercer with misdemeanor larceny by conversion and criminal trespass. The arrest warrant had been issued. "I want to let you know," Detective Morris said, "because you may want to be prepared for the next few days." "When will she be notified?" I asked. He told me that the warrant would be served at her home, likely Saturday morning. I thanked him and hung up. I sat for a moment with the phone in my hand. Then I called Patty and told her we would be at the luncheon. I want to be precise about Saturday, because Saturday is the part of this story that people find hardest to believe, and I want you to understand that I did not orchestrate what happened. I attended a family event. I brought a dish, a fruit salad, because I was not going to bring banana bread. What I did not know and could not have predicted was that the officers would arrive at Diane's house at 10:15 a.m., 45 minutes before the first guests were scheduled to arrive, and that Diane would not be home. She had gone to the grocery store for extra napkins, and that the officers would wait in their car at the curb, and that they would still be there when Sandra and Beverly and Trish pulled into the driveway at 10:55, followed shortly by Daniel and me and Patty, followed shortly by Diane's car, pulling around the corner at 11:02 a.m. I know the times because I was watching. I watched Diane park. I watched her get out of the car with 2 bags from Harris Teeter and a paper tablecloth tucked under her arm. I watched her look at the police car. I watched her look at the cluster of women on her front porch. I watched her face go through several things in rapid succession. Confusion, then recognition, then something I can only describe as the specific terror of a person who has been managing a situation and has just understood that the situation has escaped management. She walked to the officers. One of them got out of the car. I was standing on the porch with Daniel and Patty and Sandra and Beverly and Trish, and I watched. Daniel's hand was on my arm, not restraining, just present, and I appreciated it. The officer read Diane her rights on her own front lawn, in front of her church friends, in front of her son, in front of her daughter-in-law, in front of the women whose good opinion she had spent decades cultivating. She went through the stages I had expected. First, warmth. There's been a terrible misunderstanding. Officer, please, let me explain. The officer was patient but unmoved. Then, tears, real ones, I think, though I have learned not to trust Diane's tears, directed at Daniel. Danny, please, tell them this is a misunderstanding. Tell them. Daniel stood very still. He looked at his mother. He looked at her for a long time, and I watched his face, and I saw the moment when something shifted in him. Not dramatically, not with a gasp or a shout, just a quiet reorientation, the way a compass needle settles. He did not say it was a misunderstanding. Then, when neither the officer nor Daniel responded as she needed them to, Diane's voice changed. The warmth dropped. The tears stopped. She looked at me directly, and her voice was the voice I had heard only twice before, low and precise and stripped of performance. And she said, I will not forgive you for this, Claire. You have destroyed this family. I hope you understand that. I had thought about what I would say in this moment. I had thought about it for 2 weeks. I looked at her across the lawn, with the morning sun behind her, and the Harris teeter bags still in her hands, and 25 years of Sunday school behind her. And I said, quietly enough, that only the people closest to me could hear. You told me once that family shares everything. You were right. That's why what you did is a crime. She stared at me. The officer touched her elbow. She looked away. I watched them put her in the car. I watched the car pull away from the curb. Trish, standing next to me, said nothing for a long time. Then she said very quietly, I had no idea. Most people didn't, I said. That was the point. The fruit salad was never served. The luncheon did not happen. The women from the church gathered on Diane's lawn for about 20 minutes, talking in low voices, and then dispersed. Daniel drove us home. Patty followed in her car and came inside and sat at our kitchen table and said very little, which was the most honest response available. The kids were at a neighbor's house for the morning, and we had until noon before we needed to pick them up, and we sat at the kitchen table in the quiet of a Saturday that had become something different from what any of us had expected. Daniel made coffee. He set a cup in front of me without asking, the way he had done every Saturday morning for 7 years, and I wrapped my hands around it and felt the warmth of it, and I thought, this is still my kitchen. This is still my house. That was not nothing. The legal process unfolded over the following 4 months, with the slow, specific machinery of the American justice system. Diane retained an attorney, a defense attorney in Clayton, and initially pleaded not guilty to the misdemeanor larceny charge and the trespass charge. Her attorney attempted, in the preliminary hearing, to argue that the spare key constituted general authorization to access the property, and that the rental activity was a good faith effort to benefit the property owners. James Okafor was ready for both arguments. The router access log established that Diane had made unauthorized changes to the network infrastructure of the property, changes that went beyond any reasonable interpretation of a spare key's purpose. The Venmo records established that she had routed the income to her own account, not ours, for the duration of the listing's operation. The recording from the porch conversation, in which she confirmed she had the money set aside in an envelope, established that she had known the income was ours and had not transferred it. Karen's statement, which described a pattern of unauthorized access and boundary violations in a previous family relationship, was admitted as character evidence in the civil portion of the proceedings. The small claims court judgment came first, $2,147 plus court costs, totaling $2,389. Diane paid it within 30 days through her attorney without contact. The criminal case resolved 3 months later with a plea agreement. Diane pled guilty to a single count of misdemeanor larceny by conversion, received 12 months of unsupervised probation, and was required to complete a financial responsibility course. No jail time. I had not asked for jail time. I had asked for accountability, and accountability is what I got. The Airbnb listing was taken down within 48 hours of the law enforcement request. Airbnb's trust and safety team permanently banned the Dia Mercer home account and flagged it in their system. They sent me a formal letter confirming the action, which I kept for the file. The Hillcrest Community Church Women's Auxiliary asked Diane to step down from her position as president following the arrest. I did not request this. It happened because Sandra and Beverly and Trish had been standing on that lawn, and because communities, when they finally see something clearly, often act faster than the courts. I know this because Patty told me 3 weeks after the luncheon that the auxiliary vote had been 12-3. Diane did not attend church for 2 months after that. When she returned, she sat in a different pew. Daniel and I went to couples counseling starting in May. The therapist was a woman named Dr. Patricia Vance, who had an office in North Raleigh and who had the specific skill of asking questions that were simple on the surface and devastating underneath. In our first session, she asked Daniel to describe his relationship with his mother in 3 words. He thought for a long time. He said, obligation, confusion, love. She asked him which one came first. He was quiet for even longer. Obligation, he said finally. I think obligation came first. That was the beginning of a real conversation, the kind we had been orbiting for years without landing. It was not a fast conversation. It was not a comfortable one. There were sessions where I cried, and sessions where he did, and sessions where neither of us could look at each other, and sessions where we walked to our car afterward and sat in the parking lot for 15 minutes before we could drive. But we went. We kept going. We are still going, as of the time I'm telling you this. Our marriage is not the same as it was before April of 2023. It is more honest. It is more deliberate. It is a marriage between 2 people who have had to choose each other consciously, explicitly, with full knowledge of the cost. I think that is better than what we had before, though I would not have chosen the path that got us here. The kids, to the extent that children can be protected from adult disasters, were protected. Lily, who was 6 at the time, asked once why Grandma Diane hadn't been at Easter, and I said that Grandma was taking some time for herself. And Lily accepted this with the practical equanimity of a 6-year-old who has more important things to think about. Marcus, who was 4, did not ask. He drew a picture of our house around that time. Crayon on printer paper, the kind of drawing that is mostly a square with a triangle on top and some yellow windows. And he labeled it, in his careful, just learning to write letters, our house, our house. I put it on the refrigerator with the pineapple magnet, and it has stayed there since. I look at it sometimes when I'm making coffee in the morning, and I think about a 4-year-old who knew, without knowing how he knew, that the house he lived in was his. Karen called me in August, 4 months after the luncheon. She was doing well. She had started seeing someone new, a man she'd met through a friend, and she sounded lighter than she had in the coffee shop in Durham. She said, I need to tell you something. When you called me in April, I had been carrying what happened to me for 5 years. I had never told anyone the full story except my therapist. And when you asked me for a statement, I almost said no. Not because I didn't want to help, but because I was afraid no one would believe me. What changed? I asked. You believed me, she said, without hesitation. You called me and you asked and you believed me, and that was the first time anyone in that family had ever done that. I didn't have anything to say to that felt adequate. I said, "I'm glad you told me." She said, "Me too." The brass key is still in my possession. After the small claims judgment came through, I took it out of the evidence folder and held it for a while. The silk ribbon was a little frayed. The engraving was still clear. Our wedding date on one side, the word home on the other. I thought about what Diane had intended when she gave it to me, and I thought about what it had come to represent, and I thought about what I wanted it to mean going forward. I did not throw it away. I did not give it back. I put it in a small ceramic dish on my dresser, not displayed, not hidden, just there. The word home on one side and our wedding date on the other. A house I own, a marriage I chose again, a life that is mine in ways it was not, fully, before. Sometimes I look at it and think about the woman who received it with tears in her eyes in 2016 and believed it was a promise of love. I don't hate that woman. She was doing the best she could with what she knew. I just know more now. The key doesn't open anything. It never did. But I decide what it means, and that, I've come to understand, is the whole point. If this story hit somewhere familiar, if you've ever had someone take something from you and call it help, or watched a person you trusted let you down when it mattered most, or spent years wondering if you were the problem before you found out you were the solution, subscribe to this channel, because every week we tell another story like this one. Every week there is another woman who kept her receipts, and every week when she finally opens that folder and slides it across the table, it means something. It means everything. Don't miss it. There is a particular kind of peace that follows a long fight. It is not happiness exactly, and it is not relief. Those come in moments, then recede. It is something quieter and more durable. It is the peace of a woman sitting in her kitchen on a Saturday morning with her children's voices coming from upstairs and a cup of coffee in her hands, and the absolute knowledge that the house around her is hers, legally, physically, incontrovertibly hers, and that no one is going to come through that door without her permission. Not anymore. I earned that peace. I documented it. I filed for it. I sat in a lawyer's office and a detective's office and a therapist's office and a small claims courtroom, and I built it the way you build anything that matters, one careful, specific, well-documented step at a time. It was not the life I planned when I stood at an altar in Chapel Hill in September of 2016 with a brass key in a box and a mother-in-law who cried at the ceremony. But it is the life I have, and I have chosen it, and I am, on most mornings, sitting in this kitchen with this coffee, genuinely glad to be in it. That is enough. That is, I have decided, more than enough.